Good day everyone. First, I am Jameson Besa of Visit Filipino Two-Way. In today's discussion, we will tackle laws and policies on violence and discrimination of the members of LGBTQ+, and also the Child Protection Policy of 2012. Particularly, this discussion will exemplify ourselves to the inner part of human rights and other existing laws to impose to the members of LGBTQ+, and what is the current status they have from specific society they belong. Also, we will tackle the Child Protection Policy of 2012 in order to know the existing rights of every Filipino children. So, let's begin our discussion. Before we're gonna proceed in our main topic, first we will gonna identify and prescribe the intended laws and policies imposed to the violence and discrimination that particularly experienced by our neighbor, or as we say, to the members of LGBTQ+. To specifically exemplify the laws, policies intended to the violence and discrimination that happened to the member of LGBTQ+. As we all know, they are the type of community group where almost had a trauma because of discrimination, violence portrayed by the other member of society, which simply against the LGBT community. That's why several incidents have been recorded, not only in the Philippine society, but also around the world, that specifically evolving to the discrimination and violence against to the member of LGBTQ+. That's why in this discussion, we will try to identify and prescribe some specific laws and policies intended to the rights of LGBTQ+. At this manner, we will carefully scope the information and other intended factors pertaining to this discussion in order not to act biased from them. Now, the question is, due to the legitimacy, it is real that there is existing laws and policies intended to the member of LGBTQ+. Do we really care about the welfare of our neighbor or to the member of LGBTQ+? As we know, several members of LGBTQ+, who are persuaded to proclaim some specific rights or human rights that may also exercise of LGBTQ+ member. In this regard, some specific international leaders that operate the human rights are being forced to create specific manner of laws and policies intended to the LGBT community so that they could protect themselves from the violence and discrimination portrayed by the other member of society. The human rights of every individual are rights inherent to all human beings. We are all equally entitled to our human rights without discrimination, whatever nationalities, place of residence, sex, or ethnic origin, color, religion, language, or any other status such as age, disability, health status, sexual orientation, or gender identity. These rights, whether not or civil and political rights such as the right to life, equality before the law, and freedom of expression, or economic or social and cultural rights such as the rights to work, social security, and education, are indivisible, universal, interrelated, and interdependent. Which means worldwide or the international leaders are specifically persuaded to promote the human rights regardless of what type of gender orientation that individuals are being portrayed. Also nationality, place of residence, sex, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, language, as age, disability, health status, and sexual orientation. Which means the LGBT community or members are also scoped by this human preposition, which the human rights. But due to some circumstances and other situation intended, there are several or few members of LGBTQ+ around the world that we could say have not exercised their human rights. Now, their government are trying to act what is necessary sanction or punishment with regard to the individuals or person who known that impose violence and discrimination against the member of LGBT community. Human rights were developed and articulated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948 as a response to the atrocities of World War II. Universal human rights are often expressed and guaranteed by the law in the forms of treaties, customaries in international law, general principles in other source of international law. International human rights laws lays down obligation of governments to act in a certain ways or to refrain from certain acts in order to promote and protect human rights and fundamental freedoms of individuals or groups. So it is very clear that the human rights are being operated by the existing law or which under to the international law. Also, the government are the major role player of this certain proportion in order to safeguard the human rights of every individuals or person. Let's quote the statement of Filipino LGBT member known as Ray Balmares Salinas with regard to the ridiculous joke portrayed by one of the president candidates. But in order to avoid irrelevant opinion, let's just read the statement quietly from the given photo. The following are some common forms of human rights violation that specifically affecting the LGBTQ+, such as violent attacks ranging from aggressive verbal abuse and psychological bullying to physical assault, beatings, torture, kidnapping, and targeted killings. Discriminatory criminal laws often used to harass and punish LGBT people, including criminalizing sexual and same-sex relationships which violate the rights to privacy and to freedom from discrimination. Discriminatory curbs on free speech and related restrictions on the exercise of rights to freedom of association and assembly, including laws banning dissemination of information on same-sex sexuality under the guise of restrict spread of so-called LGBT propaganda. Discriminatory treatment, which can take place in a range of everyday settings including workplace, school, family and homes, hospital, without national laws prohibiting the discrimination by third parties on grounds of sexual orientation and gender identity, such as discriminatory treatment and continuous unchecked and leaving little recourse to those affected. In this context, lack of legal recognition of same-sex relationship or of a person gender identity can also have discriminatory in any LGBT individuals. Next is the Philippine setting laws and policies on violence and discrimination of the LGBT community. As we all know, the Philippine society are commonly traditional and culturistic, which bring a difficulties to accept the fact that LGBTQ+ are also part of the society. At this manner, years ago, LGBTQ+ are particularly had a struggle in order to suit or fit themselves from the Philippine society. Those years are very hard for the members of LGBTQ+, but now in our current settings, we all know that the different institution and other intended public and private establishments are particularly promote the equality or human rights for the member of LGBTQ+. But clearly, we could also see and hear from news in TV, radio station, and other newspapers that there are still few cases of violence and discrimination to the members of LGBTQ+ in the Philippine society, like we have seen from the given photo. At this manner, even the Philippine government who are trying to keep the rights and laws and policies pertaining to the violence and discrimination of the member of LGBTQ+ are may not experience such violation. Even though there is an existing laws, still Philippine government can't control the other members of society. But commonly in our current setting, the LGBT community are now being part of specific laws, and there is a government and non-government official who are trying to pursue the rights of LGBTQ+. So we can say that LGBTQ+ community are under to the laws, policies, and other rights that been exercised by the other member of society. In that manner, we could proclaim that the LGBTQ+ are now part of society who have exercised the laws, policies, and other rights. Next is the Child Protection Policy of 2012. In the Philippine settings, the very common existing law are the Child Protection Policies of 2012. These laws are specifically articulated in order to protect the rights intended to every Filipino children so that they could have a proper education, healthcare, nutrition, and other existing programs The Child Protection Policy of 2012 are particularly generated in order to safeguard the welfare of every Filipino children that they may could exercise their rights regardless of what sex, gender, religion, colors, status, and other intended preposition they had. Specifically speaking, the Child Protection Policy of 2012 are the intended policy guidelines for protecting the children from school abuse, violence, and exploiting, discrimination, and other forms of abuse. So that's all. Thank you and good day again.